Mighty number 9!
So we're finally back here again. Hello everyone and welcome technically back to Let's Play Mighty number 9. In the last part, we finished off the main campaign and finished the entire playthrough as Beck, but as I talked about during the credits of that LP as well as during the DLC level, there's an entire other campaign we're going to be playing through as the DLC character, Ray. In order to actually select her campaign, though, it's a little awkward. You actually have to go into your main save file and then press up on the main stage select to switch between her and Beck. It doesn't feel very good to do. Notably, if you were a backer for this game, you got this DLC for free. Similarly, there was a code included in every physical copy you could buy, but if you got this game post-market or digitally, Ray's DLC is $5 on any given store. Let's not mess around, let's start back in the city and get right on into the Ray campaign.
12 hours. That's all I have. I must hold, must keep it together, or all the evidence I've found will be lost. Cell. It's cells. Maybe the Colosseum would have enough. Will the lunatics never tire of seeing their toys smashing into each other? Sunda Technologies. That name certainly rings a bell. Perhaps I should try to learn more. So this is Sunda Technologies. Noise! A familiar sound. There's something about the screams. Almost beautiful. I have no stake in this human crisis, but it should make for an excellent hunting ground.
So the main reason we're actually doing Ray's campaign is that she has her own cutscenes and some relatively unique abilities to go along the way, because the levels themselves aren't changed basically at all, except there's actually less dialogue going on because there's actually very few cutscenes in the campaign. You only get one at the start, at the end, and every couple of mighty numbers we actively defeat. So let's talk about Ray's main abilities. Her status in canon as Mighty Number 0, as brought up in background details, is very evident in her playstyle because she is sort of the Zero to Beck's Mega Man X. Albeit Beck himself is also a lot closer to classic Mega Man, which is a little weird. I think she should be a little closer to Proto Man, but oh well. Her main attack is a 3-hit combo with her claws. That hits pretty hard, actually, in the long run. It actually does more damage than some of the equivalents to the reselections we're going to get throughout the playthrough. And it also has some pretty good range on its third strike. Additionally, she still has the dash. But her dash also counts as an attack, unlike Beck's, which only really absorbs Zells. With that said, we have to talk about her major gimmick. You might be able to hear it in the background, but there's a heartbeat going on every couple of seconds. Every time the heartbeat happens, a little bit of Ray's health turns red. Whatever amount of your health bar is red when you take a hit is how much damage you actively take from that hit. Which means bosses can do a minimum of damage, but that means also any small enemy theoretically could also be an instant kill if you're taking too long between hits. With that said, it's not the be-all end-all, because for one thing you can still get health pickups in the stage and all that will recover it. But also, whenever you absorb Zell from an enemy, whatever portion of your health is red is recovered back to max. So there's a pseudo time limit when playing as Ray. That sounds kind of strict, but honestly is pretty easy to work around. Honestly, I think that her unique abilities actually make for a relatively exhilarating gameplay style that I think actually does better with how some of the game wants to work. Sometimes it's making you go fast and get through the stages as quickly as you can, keeping up a combo of Zell absorption. But that also just runs counter to some of the abilities and some other level design still, so It fixes some issues, I think, from the main campaign, but also adds a lot of new ones, especially later on. I ultimately do like this, though, because I think it actually distinctifies Beck and Ray better than, say, Mega Man and Proto Man in the long run, because what does Proto Man have nowadays that Mega Man doesn't? The charge shot in 9 and 10, takes double damage, has the shield. That's about it. Her actively having a unique combat style on top of a new mechanic, I think, is an interesting idea. With that said, time for our first boss, the CDN 502. Bosses, by and large, work the same way as they did in the main campaign. You do chunks of their health bar at a time, and then you get a Zell absorption, which counts for your combo, but also in this case actively acts as a heal for Rey. Boss fights can be tense as her, but ultimately aren't the worst. With, like, 2 exceptions, really, and those are 2 particular mighty numbers. The intro boss, though, not a lot to write home about still. In fact, if anything, it's even less to write home about than it was with Beck, because the individual claw strikes, I think, do more damage than Beck's Buster Shots did. You still get ranked at the end of the stages. I did a lot of getting A's and B's in the main campaign. That is not happening as Rey, for a lot of reasons.
These haywire machines, they smell different. They taste different. There's something about the cells in these Sonda robots. Something familiar. I can't help myself. I want more. Yes, more! I must have more! That Japanese art. Dedication to robotics. Probably the same sort of sentiment he would say to me, the heartless monster. Could there be some connection? Some reason these Sonda cells taste so familiar? The more I feed, the more I will learn.
And thus we enter the main meat of the campaign, because now we can access mighty numbers 1 through 8 with Rey. I'm going to be playing through the stages in the exact same order I did during the Beck playthrough, though, for 2 reasons. For one thing, I think it's still a relatively easy boss order to maintain, and it keeps it consistent, but also, for reasons we'll get into when we get there, Pyrogen and Cryosphere are nightmares as Rey, so you really want to try to save them for last if you can, unless you just want to try to rip off that Band-Aid. What's kind of funny about Rey, because we only get cutscenes with her every here and again, the levels come across as very silent. But honestly, with how chatty the main game gets, I think that can kind of be an upgrade. I don't mind dialogue in levels, I just think the original game kind of overdoes the amount of times you get contacted per. Without it just being like the alias system from X5 through 8, where like there's places you can press like select to listen to what they have to say. I think that wouldn't be too bad. So in some regards, the levels actually come across a little better as Rey than they do as Beck. With that said, as good as the game wants to reward you for rushing through them as Beck, sometimes rushing through them as Rey can seem a little risky because of her health mechanic, especially when you got explosive hazards that can damage you at any point in time, on top of rushing potentially leading to more mistakes in how you're playing through the levels and getting knocked into instant death hazards. Again, remember, Mighty Number 9 technically has the Mega Man 1 spike glitch, where even if you get hit into spikes, it's still an instant kill. What's kind of weird about Battalion Stage is that you actively have to do some relatively precise slashes with your claws if you come here first, as otherwise you're just going to explode the barrels from a certain angle and get hit by them. But it's also a good point to note, you can actually, once again, use your dash as an attack as Rey, and there's a lot of enemies, especially on the smaller scale. The fastest way to kill them isn't to attack them with your slashes, it's just to dash straight through them. Like the weird screw cannon enemies, you can dash through their head. Any of the flying enemies, you can just dash right on through them and it'll count. Things like that. In some regards, I'd say Rey has an easier time in combat despite her relative fragility due to her health gimmick. But at the same time, it really depends on how much you like being up close and personal in games like this to begin with. Like, if you like playing as Zero in Mega Man X's 4 through 8, you're probably going to have a fine time here, barring the game's own issues, of course, but even then. With that said, I'm also going to use this playthrough to try and talk about some things in the main campaign I didn't really talk about that also still apply here. For instance, let's talk about the scoring system and how it works. Namely, in the end of stage rankings. Because you need to get certain ranks in order to get certain achievements, and hey, in the case you're going for the platinum, for some reason, you might as well have that information out there. I'm going to be reading most of this information admittedly off of the Mighty Number 9 wiki, though, as they did a good job researching that outright. So at the end of every stage, you're given a total score, which is then ranked on a D through S rank. Those ranks there are decided from your score in the top right, added with various bonus scores given with extra categories at the end of a given stage or through little bonuses in the stage itself. At the end of the stage, the bonus scores you get are your clear time, damage, kills, combos, and Zell absorptivity average. Let's talk about each of those individually. For instance, clear time. Every stage has a unique par time to itself that if you beat by a certain amount of seconds, you get a bonus score applied. If you reach the par time equally, you get 1,000 points, and that's a B rank. Up to 10 seconds below par, that's still a B rank. Beating it by 15 to 25 seconds is an A rank, but beating it by 30 seconds or above is what gets you an S rank in that particular junction. That score maxes out at 10,000 by beating the par time of a given level by a minute. Kills is pretty similar. There's a target kill count for every single stage. If you hit that, you get the S rank and the 10,000 score bonus, but for every kill below that, you get less and less points up to 10 kills below par, which is 500 points. The combos bonus score keeps in mind the combo system, which I only briefly talked about in the main game. Effectively, whenever you kill an enemy and they start glowing, you can absorb them, of course. Getting multiple 100s in a row is what starts a combo. It's a 100% combo, effectively. The end of stage combo bonus tally keeps in mind your highest combo in that stage up to that point versus the par for one in that stage. Namely, to get the highest score from this, you need to have a combo of 20 points or higher above the par of a given stage for 20,000 bonus points. Your Zell absorption average at the end of stage ranking is pretty straightforward. That's just the average of every enemy kill you got throughout. So if you got 100% on every single enemy, you're going to get 100% on that, which gives you the 20,000 bonus score. But if you get a minimum of 50%, that's 500 to your score, which is not a lot. For now, though, let's once again talk about Battalion's attacks. He can fire missiles that go across the screen but try to track upwards into you if you move above them. He has a bullet fire attack with his Gatling gun that fires straight up, then an arc upwards, then he usually follows that up with a jump upwards into the air where he does an arc downwards you need to watch out for. Fighting him as Ray is a lot more dangerous because you need to be straight up in his face a lot more often, which means if you're not careful, it's very easy to eat some bullets directly from his Gatling gun. In that case, I think his worst attack is the jump shots downwards, because it's kind of hard to predict when he's going to do that because he doesn't always follow up the main bullets with that. You are going to see me die a lot more in this playthrough than you did as Beck, because for one thing, I wasn't nearly as perfectionist about the playthrough, but for another, just in general, because of her health mechanic and even some of the boss weaknesses, Ray's playthrough is ultimately harder than Beck's because you're in danger much more often. Speaking of which, Battalion still has his Battalion Cannon attack, which fires a giant missile across the screen. Getting hit by that's an instant kill, but also now that missile's embedded in the wall, and if you get too close, touch it, or occasionally just periodically, he'll light it up to cause a giant explosion on that side of the screen that is also an instant kill. This effectively cuts the room size for safe walking to about a half to a third, but since he only does it periodically, if you just stick to like the latter half of the screen, you're probably going to be fine. With that said, it definitely makes this fight a lot more stressful as Ray, because you don't have that leeway anymore to move around in because you're trying to get around his jumps. He is dangerous, but his weapon to jumpstart the weakness chain for both characters is just one of the best, so I still recommend taking him on first.
Mission clear.
There's also sometimes I swear the health in this particular playthrough isn't exactly what it showcases itself to be, because I swear I kill bosses before their health is fully emptied in some cases. But now time for something a little different from Beck's playthrough. Whereas Beck gets reselections from beating any given mighty number boss, Ray instead gets variation codes. This isn't just a naming difference. By and large, every single variation code is a radically different weapon than Beck's reselections. There's a couple that are pretty similar, and they have things in common, but they're largely very different weapons. For instance, variation code Battalion, Gatling shot. Holding down the attack button will fire a continuous stream of shots in front of the player. Attack energy will be depleted while using this attack. Not as good as the reselection for Battalion, because that missile was just outright busted against most things. But don't knock the Gatling shot, it is pretty good still. Also, I didn't really talk in the main LP about the shortcut system at all. By and large, the way actually choosing a weapon in this game, it's not like you pause and then select it on the pause screen like it is in classic Mega Man or X even, or really any Mega Man game. Because by default, you press a button to bring up a drop-down menu below your portrait in the top left, and then you scroll up and down between them to choose a power from there. The shortcuts allow you to map 3 specific powers to, I think, triangle, left stick, and right stick click-ins. The way I would usually play this is you make 2 of them a consistent power-up, and then you rotate the 3rd one out for the new boss weaknesses, because there's always, I think, 2 or 3 powers in a game like this that are generally better for some form of mass clearing out of enemies. With that said, assuming you're going in weakness order, whoever your second stage is also going to demonstrate another change for this particular playthrough from the Beck playthrough, namely, as Beck, whenever you go into a mighty number that you beat the weakness of already, like in this case we beat Battalion going into Seismic, in the main campaign, you would usually find the previous mighty number you beat, helping you in some way, removing a hazard, showing up for some extra dialogue, fighting some enemies as well, things like that, like in particular in this stage. Later on in the Beck playthrough, Battalion takes out a couple of these instant kill drills to make one screen easier. We have to do all the screens that were made easier like that as Beck, normally as Ray, so we actively do have a harder stage in front of us. Usually the puzzles and the hazards they usually work around are still pretty easy to get around to begin with, but I did like that minor change in the main campaign. I don't mind it being missing from Ray, though, because ultimately she's meant to be the harder mode to begin with. With that said, let's go back to talking about the end-of-stage ranking system and the last bonus score criteria, damage. This one's a little weird in that it actively counts the amount of points of damage you take in the stage rather than the amount of hits you take. And what's weird about that is, in order to get the S rank individually for this, technically, you need to get hit 0 times or hit 5 points of damage or less on a given stage run. But most enemies do 2 points of damage, apparently, in their given attacks. So that means you need to get hit less than 3 times, which I think is a little bit much to ask for in this game, especially when you're playing as Ray. You get a minimum in that particular point by taking 30 or more points of damage, which I'd say on a first playthrough is very likely. With that said, I think you do lose a lot of these points in the case you die too many times in a stage, but I'm not exactly sure what the requirements are for that. Either way, if you're going for trophies, it only really matters if you're playing as Beck, because I don't think Ray has any trophies tied to her scores. With that said, since we just saw Sprinter, let's now talk about the bonus scores within the stage themselves, the in-game bonuses. Sprinter happens upwards of 6 times per stage. At certain points, a timer starts up, and if you get through that section of the stage quickly enough, you get the Sprinter bonus for an extra 2,000 points. Amazing is given out for another 2,000 points at certain points as well, usually by taking a harder path. Those ones are a little more specific depending on the stage. Fine play is only during boss fights. You get those for making plays that show high skill, reflexes, or smartness, like canceling out their attacks with their weakness, evading every shot in a certain attack, things like that. Most bosses apparently have 2 fine plays, but some apparently offer 3. Speaking of which, Seismic, while he takes longer to kill with Ray's version of Battalion's weapon, you do melt through his HP noticeably fast. Seismic as a boss, though, he can drop a bunch of boxes down to limit your movement around, but he can also just smash them outright, and as you progress through his health bar, he makes the arena smaller and smaller using little pillars. Supposedly, you can actually get him trapped into the pillars himself, and it can instant kill him, but that's pretty hard for me to do on a given playthrough. And for beating him, we get his variation code, which is miles better than Beck's Resurrection here. Beck's Resurrection effectively turned you into a walking hitbox with tank treads. The variation code for Ray instead gives her a drill attack that travels forward, hits an enemy, and can travel backwards, hitting them again. And you can also use it as a platforming tool to grab onto higher ledges in the case you need to. In that regard, it's actually technically the platforming toolkit reselection of sorts, like Aviators was in the Beck campaign. We'll read the exacts of it in a moment, though.
What should we tackle
I'll also
next?
start talking about the par times for all the score requirements and stages starting next time, including the stages we've already done. Drill Anchor. Ray extends her arm, which has been transformed into a drill, and damages any enemies in her line of sight. This attack always has penetration properties and cannot be blocked by enemy shields. While using this attack, if there's a climbable ledge in range, the drill will automatically latch onto this ledge. Holding action shift while attacking will negate this ability. Notably, this is also one of the few weapons between the 2 campaigns you can also just directly aim upwards with, which can be surprisingly useful in some cases. But with that, I'm going to need to end this off here. Thank you guys for watching, and in part 2, we're heading after more mighty numbers. See you guys then.